Welcome to hour number 2 on a Monday with hashtag Daily K's host, Peter Bid. Tired of just scratching the surface of Korea? Want to get deep in the weeds?
We unpack everything about Korea through its history on
Now and Then
with David.
It is time to let go of any preconceived ideas that history is boring and difficult. Every Monday we learn about various parts of Korea's history linked to everyday events with Dr. Professor, Father, unfortunately Liverpool fan David Tizard, kind of in the studio. Hello, David.
Despite all my rage, I am still just a professor in a cage. Here I am, Peter. Yes, good morning. Thank you.
We've got you on the video, and I think we'll switch between cameras. We might do a split screen as well so the listeners can see you. Just to my left, and listeners, if you were on board from a year ago, you'll remember when we used to have our guests in the separate studio, and Good Morning Seoul has been doing it for quite a while as well, and I think we can share this with our listeners because it might help them understand the COVID rules and regulations at the moment.
You're going to tell them about the animal magnetism I have and how you had trouble being so close to me.
It's the new season, and I just felt my testosterone was bursting at the seams.
It happens, you know. I'm glad that you're comfortable with that and sharing that with the nation, Peter.
Yeah, but I don't want it on a video stream, which will be immortalised in memes forever. But do you mind sharing why we're doing this, David? Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. It's absolutely fine to share. So somebody in our family has contacted COVID. Mm-hmm. They've been isolating in the house. I've since come to Seoul and isolated myself there. Mm-hmm. Tests negative this morning.
Great.
No symptoms. But I think it reflects what's happening in South Korea at the moment. I was reading a very interesting thread from a virologist on social media who said that because South Korea had done such a good job at protecting itself previously, now the numbers are really ramping up, like something we've never seen before. Sure. And so that's where we are now. Yeah. We're keeping safe.
Yeah, so it's just in case, like David said, he's tested negative, and that's the rules at the moment. Even if someone in your house has COVID, as long as you test negative, you can go out and about. Because as David said, record-breaking numbers. If everyone stayed at home who had a close contact, no one would be working in Korea.
I've got lectures today. I checked with the university and they said go to class. So, yep, there we are.
Well, you can tell them what Pop Hop, our listener, said. David has the cooties. No, he does not have the cooties, is the message today. Sarah asked us earlier, and I think it's a good segue into today's topic, what the weather is like in Korea at the minute today. It was a little bit chillier than it has been over the past couple of days. I think we've forecast some rain here in Seoul maybe after about lunchtime, and that's been really welcome rain that we had across the weekend, right?
Absolutely, it's made running a bit easier, but the rain is very important. So one of the topics that that we're going to be talking about today are these forest fires that for about the last 10 days have spread across a certain part of Korea. Yeah. Over the weekend, there has been rain, there's been drizzle, there's been heavier rain depending where you are. But as you can imagine, that plays a really important role in helping to contain these. It's nature's fire extinguisher.
Yes.
in so much, because particularly in spring, this is something I'd never really noticed before in Korea, just about the weather, Pete. It's really dry here in South Korea. And you'll see people, there's none in here at the moment, have like humidifiers in their desks just blowing steam at them.
Yeah, like the mini ones have really started trending the past few years. I had one last year with me because a fellow like radio person was like, it's really good for your voice and your throat and you don't want to lose that. Yeah. And it was just one that you charge, and it was about the size of a tumbler, and I just put it next to me on the desk. I don't know if it did anything, but it looked cool. It had like fancy lights and everything.
It looked cool. A few students had it while I was doing online Zoom, and it kind of looked like they were smoking or in concert sometimes, because I kept seeing this smoke coming across. Yeah. But it's very dry in South Korea, and so for your voice, for your skin, things like this, humidifiers, but for the weather. Yeah. And it plays such a big role. How dry it is means even any spark can become incendiary.
Yeah.
And rain, the drizzle that we've had has been so good this weekend.
Yeah, because we do have quite a few of those helicopters that you often see dispatch when there's a forest fire. Inevitably, every year around this time, there is one or two, and it depends on the scale. But they really cannot do anything compared to what the clouds can bring.
Absolutely.
And in terms of extinguishing them. So this one that's been raging for what seems like a record time. It's apparently, the biggest ever? The most devastating ever?
It's pretty big. I think once the dust settles, we'll have a better idea. But there have been many over the years, and this is actually quite a regular event. Certainly, we see forest fires. We've seen them in Australia recently. We've seen them in certain parts of America. Other parts of the world experience this. The ones in South Korea are much smaller in comparison because South Korea is much smaller. But they are here. Just to give you an update, it was going for about 9 days. Yesterday morning, the head of the Korea Fire Service, Choi Byung-am, he announced that the main fire was extinguished. So that's been put out, but it was going for 9 days. When he gave an update on everything that had unfolded, nearly 650 houses destroyed. Lots of livestock, lots of factories, warehouses, 31 religious facilities destroyed. So a lot of infrastructure, a lot of economic damage, a lot of agricultural damage and waste. Fortunately, no human casualties. And that all credit goes to the people of South Korea for doing that, and also the emergency services, because they've done a fabulous job at protecting people's lives.
Yeah, whenever we have these wildfires, and here in Seoul you don't really feel it because it's on usually the East Coast. We've had more recent years, the terrible fires. But when you see it on the news, and we showed the pictures to our listeners, it's devastating, and it's right close to the roads as well, where cars seem to still be driving by. But I always am really surprised in a good way that there are such few, if any, casualties. It seems like every year. It's unbelievable.
They do happen every year, and forgive me, listeners, I can't see the pictures that Pete, so they might help to, give you an idea of what's going on. They do happen. They are a regular occurrence, and they also happen in the same place, Pete. So it's predominantly on that East Coast, around Uljin, around Sokcho and Gangneung, which is about an hour away from where I am in the countryside, actually.
Oh, wow,
most of the
not
time.
that far.
Very, very close. And so kind of on alert we are at times. And when you see these pictures during the week, the main fire was stretching towards a LNG, like a natural gas facility.
Oh, goodness.
And then a nuclear plant. And when it came on the news that these fires were going towards these installations, and you were seeing this just after the situation in Ukraine and such forth, it really felt apocalyptic. I don't use hyperbole often, but when you saw these fires going towards these reactors and gas containers, and you realized humans cannot really control this or stop this. It's not a matter of will. It's not a matter sometimes of prayers, but we need infrastructure. We need nature to cooperate in helping to control these things.
Absolutely. And thank goodness it has come to the rescue just in the nick of time as well. I wasn't aware of the potential. It would have been huge damage then caused through that LNG plant and a nuclear reactor. I don't even want to think about that.
I was looking it on the news and I was watching it, and then I asked my brother-in-law, because it was all in Korean, I said, I joked, that's not a nuclear, good job that's not a nuclear reactor. He looked at me and he went, David.
Yes,
it is.
Oh my.
Practice your Korean.
Goodness, that is insane, isn't it? And I've heard on various news shows it being called perhaps the biggest ever or the longest ever continuous in terms of being a big blaze. And I don't know, many of our listeners saying it's crazy how we're seeing more and bigger forest fires, not just in Korea, but around the globe. And I feel that way as well. I wonder if it's just because we're in this time and we're just attuned to it more. But it does feel like we've not seen this before to this scale and this frequency. I'm sure climate change is playing a little role.
I think there might be a little bit of confirmation bias in it, because they did happen in the past. And I might go into the history of some of them, but there were more deaths in the past as well. Now we have social media. The information gets out, those alert systems that you're well aware of or touch. Just to give the listeners some idea of size, how big these fires were. So it stretched across various provinces, and it's always measured in hectares. And you're like, what's a hectare? Is that like a Russian scientist or something? It sounds a bit like one, doesn't it? But no, a hectare is a unit of size. To put it into football fields, so I heard you ragging on Liverpool earlier.
Yes.
Let's do it in football fields. The fire spread over the size of 33,000 football fields.
Wow. Okay.
That's pretty big if you think of it like that. You're not just thinking 1, 2, 33,000 football fields. And imagine how many times Liverpool could beat Arsenal on 33,000 football fields. Be amazing.
Music that you want to dance to. Arirang Radio.
Lots of messages coming in as well. Yana's saying, the fire incident, I saw that on the news. And Pei commenting, even hot car exhaust systems can set grass on fire in certain dry conditions. Everyone has to be extra vigilant around this time of year in Korea. We often hear like the infomercials telling us that, right?
Absolutely. And just looking at some of these listeners' messages, it's fascinating to hear how much of a global problem this is. We see it in Korea, and I think there might be sometimes specific reasons why Korea comes, not just weather. We'll get into that. Silver Granny and a grumpy gnome says that trees need fires in order to set their seed. Yes, that is the fuel. And several years ago, Silver Granny and a grumpy gnome and Grumpy had to drive through the edges of a wildfire traveling on Interstate 40 from Arizona.
Oh my goodness.
That's I'm glad that you're all safe. That's fantastic to hear. Steve also says that in California, same straits there with the fires. So
you see that on the news more these days, right? And lots of big mansions being burnt to the ground and stuff. It does look like it would be terribly frightful to live in a place affected year after year by them, I feel.
Indeed. I just had this one thought as we were talking about these, which is, I don't think that there has been a film made about forests. We've had some about volcanoes, we've had them about tornadoes, twisters, we've had them about viruses, we've had them about tsunamis and waves. All of the natural disasters get a film, and they get either an A-list or a B-list actor in there. Where's the forest fire film? This is Chabiala. Come on, they need to sort this out.
We need Dwayne Johnson to take the lead in that, I feel.
I was thinking like, Peter Bint or something like that, but we'll get there in the end.
Fingers crossed. Maybe I'll play Dwayne Johnson's stunt double. People did call me The Rock when I was younger.
Sarah, you're a bit thick.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Sarah Louise also saying, the positive side, it can help with forest regrowth.
Yep.
And as David said, this has happened forever, right? There have been forest fires, I believe, as long as there have been forests. It's not just man-made causes that can start the fires after all. And it does help with the regeneration. It's just sometimes the damage can be absolutely devastating. Benedict saying fires usually here in some lands that are north of the expressways of Manila, and I think that can often happen, like roads connect as almost breakers in the fire if they're wide enough to stop them from spread and contain them and stuff, right?
Absolutely. Just to give you this, where people talking about the number or the incidences of forest fires. A recent UN report said that extreme wildfire events are set to rise by 50% by 2000. How do you say this? 2100.
Yes.
2100.
Yes.
These new numbers, it's hard for me, Pete. I can't count beyond 10. But they're meant to grow by 50%, the UN is saying. So
that's huge.
Yeah, it is.
The issue here in Korea as well, if you come here in the wintertime, where was I driving past yesterday? It was on the way to Ilsan, and it was by the Han River, actually, on the north side. I was looking at like the foliage over there, and it was so yellow and dry, and it just looks really ready to be set on fire, because the wintertime here, it's not like Britain where the grass stays green even throughout December and January, and everything, the mountains as well. I don't love it. Some people love that kind of almost desolate environment, but it looks to me like everything looks dead Like all the trees look dead. I'm sure they're going to get their leaves again, but it looks ripe for a fire.
I think that comes when we look at it through English eyes. When we have our experiences of what a countryside should look like,
Yes.
we come and see the Korean one, and then it takes us by surprise because it doesn't match our expectations. I think for many Korean people or people from other parts of the world, for example, if you came from a more desert-oriented place, you might look at Korea and go, this place is lush. It's like a rainforest. So definitely all relative, but Pete, you're really right to mention the mountains here. Korea's topography, like the nature of its landscape, is really important. There's so many mountains here.
Yes.
They divide cities, they divide towns.
Yeah, they even punctuate the capital city. We've got Namsan, which isn't one of the tallest mountains, but just behind it we've got Umyeonsan and Gwanaksan, and they're pretty huge. And like you said, they kind of hug the city and like lead to its boundaries of boroughs and the equivalent here in Korea.
That's the geomancy. So Seoul was founded with the big mountains all around it, absolutely. And there's that wonderful expression, "산 넘어 산." Beyond the mountains, there are more mountains. It means there's always problems, I think. But it just goes into this Korean way of life. And on these mountains, there are trees. And it's that nature of these slopes which allows fires to get sort of this gravitational push up and down.
Wow.
So that helps them spread, actually. Just the nature of Korea, what it's like.
I'm a bit curious how they dealt with fires in the past. Because as I mentioned, sometimes even around Seocho, just over the mountains, if there's a small fire, you'll see the helicopters like dispatched to help out. But back in the Joseon dynasty and whatnot, what happened when there was a forest fire, I wonder?
Absolutely. So they had this thing called songge, and song refers to the pine, the type of trees, and ge is this really interesting concept. I'm not sure how much you've gone into it, but it's like this communal collective where people take care of things by themselves, like the village leader will get people together to solve problems. And so they had these kind of forest collectives. It wasn't the National Fire Service or the National Forest Agency, but they did have these during the Joseon dynasty. People were responsible for maintaining the forests, and there were also loads of laws. So, for example, if somebody cut down somewhere from 1 to 10 young trees that they weren't allowed to cut down, they would be given 50 blows. There would be, physical punishment here. If they cut down large branches, 30 blows, and also monetary fines in this. So there was a system of law that said if you went into the forests and if you started cutting stuff down that wasn't yours, if you started messing with nature, you'd be physically punished and punished that way. And that was the Joseon Shide, Joseon Dynasty's way of managing the natural environment with a stick, basically, punish you.
Maybe the one you cut down as well.
Yeah.
That's interesting, isn't it? Like, so I guess looking at how precious the forests would be in that case, rather than maybe the threat of a fire and like clearing them away to stop a fire, I suppose.
There's also this idea, Pete, that this goes into land ownership, and this was a big part in the division of Korea and the colonization of Korea. Who owns the forest?
Sure.
Who owns the land that you walk on? So, if your house is in danger, you feel possession of that and you want to protect it.
Sure.
But if the public forest is burning, then who owns that? So there is this ownership. And during the Joseon dynasty, you had, and there's still an element of it today, these forbidden forests. There was about 1,000 of them that were used exclusively by royals. So during the Joseon dynasty, certain forests would be cordoned off in which regular people couldn't go, just the exclusive playgrounds of the rich and famous.
Oh, it sounds like, I don't know, Richmond Park in the UK. I think Henry VIII or one of the Henrys used to use that as their hunting grounds and whatnot.
Just like that.
Oh, so it's as far afield as Korea where that exists amongst the rich and the famous of the time.
Now,
all about Korea.
Arirang Radio.
Lots of opinions, and this interesting picture sent in from Derek Gunther saying, check out this graphic from Minute Earth, a great book for kids, and it explains how it's partly because we put out so many natural fires that we increase the density of the forest, which actually promotes larger fires, or so they say. Wow, and they've got it in a really digestible diagram for children. They talk about other questions such as how did whales get so big? etc., etc. And then they look at the density of forests when we put fires out compared to when we don't. That's interesting. Are we causing more bigger blazes by putting out blazes when they start? Who knows?
I'm sure the world's best scientists and forest people are on this, and they will all have their opinions.
Yes.
But yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Here's another one that perhaps we haven't focused on enough, but Kay in the Caribbean gives a really important point here, which is that, of course, our hearts go out to those affected by the fires in any way, but I also feel terrible for the animals.
Yes.
And now you imagine this. This must be because there has been a lot of livestock lost in these recent fires. And,
absolutely.
We have the ability to discuss, to communicate, to do these things for animals trapped in those situations, and especially sometimes if they are trapped in agricultural conditions from which they cannot escape. What responsibility do we as humans have then? It's a really profound point, and I suddenly feel sad.
Yeah, we did a heartwarming story, a really hopeful one. And I even told my kids afterwards. We did it on the show last week. It had done the rounds in Korean media. There was this old couple who were raising just 20 cows on their farm, and they were raising them like kids almost. And as they were evacuating, they realised, oh no, they're trapped in the cow shed.
Yeah.
So they went back, risking their lives somewhat, and just opened up the gates and like shouted to the cows, shoo, shoo, get out.
Right.
They returned the next day and everything was burnt to the ground, but the cows had returned to the site of the cowshed, all 20 of them.
Wow.
And it was giving hope to people in the region and kind of, I think, giving the message as well, at least open the doors and give them a chance, you know. But I guess when you're like in that frenzy of, oh no, a fire's coming, it might not be the first thing on your list. But you're right. What responsibility do we have?
Bet those cows came back for food, didn't they?
Probably hungry,
Well, we're hungry. Where's this food? I'll tell you another heartwarming story. I love that one, Pete. That's brilliant. I saw it on the news this morning, so apologies if I don't have any photos, but it was kind of... But restaurants and cafes in and around the areas of Uljin and Gangneung, they were advertising free meals, free coffees, free jjajangmyeons and things like that, for people that were contributing, for the emergency workers, because although we are here in a, conditioned studio or in a cage and things like that, there are people out there risking their lives in conditions that come close to hell, literally. And so there was these cafes and restaurants, and they were offering free food, free services. And it was really nice to see that in this world of capitalism and things like that, we can help people. Yeah,
and just realise what's important. You don't need to take a fee. And we did have some photos to show you where it says, 커피와 음료 무료 제공해드립니다 to everyone working on these forest fires. Like you said, in awful conditions. I hope and I trust that not many people, definitely here in Korea, will abuse that system. But I hope that if you just go in and you say, I'm a firefighter there, they just give this to you as well. That's unbelievable.
Put some black soot on your face and go in and get a free... Why would you think of that?
I don't know. My mind wanders. It's my time in North London. Getting back to the script here, and I'm really interested about this next part. So how does the Korean War intermingle in our forests and our forest fires?
It's a really interesting point, and I think I have touched on it before on previous shows for our listeners, but if you see any artwork or paintings of Korea from, the Korean War or things like that, if you see mountains on the trees, if you see trees on the mountain, I got that the wrong way around, didn't I? If you see mountains on the trees, put down the bottle.
Absolutely.
If you see trees on the mountain, then it's not accurate, because the mountains during the 1940s and 50s, they were sparse. Japan was militarizing. It was building up for its invasions of China, attacks against America. So it got all the trees as fuel. It burnt them all. It took them all down. And then during the Korean War, the bombing, the tanks, and the mountains became bare. And it wasn't until about the late 1960s, 1970s, where Park Chung-hee, for all else that might be said about him, we've discussed before that he had Arbor Day. People went and planted trees, and what we have today wasn't there, let's say 50, 60 years ago. The mountains were bare.
Yeah, one of my friends, and when I came to Korea as a teenager, and a lot of teenagers then had learned about Japan in their history classes, very anti-Japanese, certainly that generation. He would often tell me, oh, those terrible Japanese people, they even got rid of all of our old trees and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, what are you talking about? I was like, I couldn't understand. And then hearing that history, it was fact, they're using the wood from Korea, just like stripping us of our resources almost.
That's a really important point, because when these fires burn across the country, for some people, not for all Koreans, but for some people, they bring the symbolism of war and colonization with them. So just like, when we have these British background subconscious, we see the countryside, that's what we relate to.
Sure.
For some people in Korea, they will see these fires and it will speak to them on a subconscious level of something deeper. It's not just nature. It's not just a modern event, but it's something steeped in Korean culture, history, and some traumas of the past as well.
Yeah. And I guess we might have then been mistaken if we're saying that these have always happened, because there might have been a period when there weren't many trees on the mountains and stuff. Maybe conversely then, and maybe a kind of silver lining, there weren't too many forest fires from maybe the end of the Japanese colonization period until we got a lot of trees back.
Here's another very sort of controversial topic to broach, but South Korea needs to defend itself. We've seen what can happen to sovereign nations with the situation in Ukraine at the moment. Yeah, South Korea has lots of army bases, lots of army bases that need to defend South Korea. And this is a very sensitive subject in South Korea. But a lot of those bases are in this area, and sparks from ammunition, from guns, from firing, from practices. These can be sparks. Now, I'm not saying they always are or they always do, but this can be. Of course, it can also be natural weather. It can also be cigarettes and citizens not behaving themselves.
Sure.
But having this kind of necessary military defense also does increase the possibility of a forest fire, and that might be why we see more of them today. Whereas in the Joseon dynasty, for example, if you have bows and arrows and horses rather than TNT and dynamite, less flammable.
Absolutely. That's an interesting cause that I didn't think of. They're still trying to look into, and it's not certain that they'll ever find out for sure what was the cause of this big fire. But I was with a couple of Korean people yesterday, and they were saying on the news there's like 3 cars that passed a stretch of road that they suspect someone threw a cigarette out of the window at. And they've released that footage on TV, so they might be investigating those people.
Imagine feeling that bad.
I know, because I'm sure it wasn't deliberate, but still being careless. In terms of, and as a final point, the emergency response here, David, it does seem like with no casualties, it's been pretty good this time.
Let's, for all that might be said about the politics this week that we've gone through in elections, let's just take our hat off to the South Korean government, the emergency services, and the people of the country. Now, in South Korea's kind of recent history, we've seen the tragic collapse of bridges, of department stores, and the sinking of a ferry, which has resulted in the loss of lives and great scars for the people. Since then, there has been this effort to send out emergency messages. I don't know if you've noticed this.
Yes.
But we get in South Korea on our phones emergency messages that you can't turn off, informing you of fires, of hot weather, of extreme rain. It might seem a little bit over the top at the times, because your phone's always going...
you're just like, not another one.
Not another one. And you do worry about the boy that cried wolf. But let's have a look. In this situation, there were no casualties, and this was a huge fire. And so if those messages annoyed us a bit, but they saved even one life, fair play to them. I'll take that all day long.
Yeah, they're amazing, because I think they're location based as well. If I'm in a different part of the country, it'll tell me like the figures for COVID that day or something, or someone gone missing in that area. So
That's
for the
right.
fires, it must be really useful to be able to send out that blanket message, get out, evacuate. Perfect stuff. As ever, David, you've been perfect, apart from the Liverpool chat. Well, it's unavoidable with you. But we'll see you again next Monday. Stay safe.
Thank you.
You can listen to Monday's segment Now and Then with David Tizard every Monday from 10 a.m. KST on #DailyK.